and specifically in Tasmania, that was 1803. And the first boats rocked up at Pure Kidna and set up their tents. It was in 1803. And that time begins here. And just before that, it is believed that beyond the first arrival of Europeans in Tasmania, that Tasmanians, we had 9 nations, possibly more. 9 nations that spoke up to 16 different languages. And within those nations, we had our clans and we had our family groups. There could have been more than 16 languages, but they were never recorded. And so as a community, with those 16 languages, we now have fragments of those languages that we are reviving and trying to speak promptly and within our community. So that was 200 years ago. We keep going down this timeline, and through this timeline, this 200 years, we had a population of 7,000 and 50,000. By 1830, mid-1830s, we had gone down to a population of 200 people. We were on the front line of colonisation here in Australia. One of the biggest impacts in the community happened here. Also in this time became the first mission set up in Australia for Aboriginal people, and also began the stolen generation. We had the first stolen child here in Tasmania, or Charita as well, over this time. We go right down to the fingernail. How's your arm doing, brother?
Pretty good.
Yeah, that's good. We get to the fingernail here, right here. And that's us today. This is us connecting to country, our way of being, and a way of connecting and understanding each other and belonging to place and space. What I ask you to consider is we've got 200 years of history here that we learn of Aboriginal culture in Australia. Can we get you, Mob, to put up your arm, please? I want you to go all the way back to that 60,000 year mark. And that's how much history we don't learn, we don't understand, and we don't connect to. I think that's a great shame, wouldn't you think? That is history that we are not understanding. We are part of that history. Country gives us that history through its spirit, and we're not connecting to it or understanding it. So that's what today's workshop is about, is you being able to ask those questions. Can we give a big round of applause for our history speakers? So what I'm going to, what was handed out, some of you may have a bit of paper and a pen. And so those guys that have a pen and a bit of paper, I want you to write down on that paper a question about Aboriginal culture. But it has a catch. It has to begin with no offence but. So you really have to think about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to find those questions. When you have written that question, bring it up to me. And then we as a panellists will go through those questions. While you guys are doing that, I'll get the panellists to introduce themselves and tell you guys a little bit more about who they are.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Rodney Dillon. Dewayne was talking about our ancestors, and one of my great-great-grandmother was a lady who was her mother was taken to Wyberlina, the first mission in Australia, and on Flinders Island, and that was Fanny Cochrane-Smith, and then she moved from there to Oyster Cove, and we've been living backwards and forwards from Oyster Cove to Nichols Rivulet and around that area ever since for the last 5 generations of my family.
Jeez, that was a quick intro. I'm Tracy Dillon, and I'm a bachelor woman from Fraser Island, now married to Rodney Dillon, and who is a Trawaway man. And so I now take on his Aboriginal ways of life and living and country, and just lucky because I'm a Sea woman too, because that's where my family come from, Fraser Island, and so it's just lucky that I ran into a man that comes from the same sort of way of living that I have. Thank you very much, Rodney Dillon.
I'm Shelley Morris. I'm a Yanyua woman from the Gulf of Carpentaria.
Waterman, which is west of Katherine, out to Kalkaringi, which is Gurindji country. Yo.
Maraire nengadin napu nanalai. Maraire nengadin kuki nalalai. Maraire waripa. My name is Kucha Edwards. I am a Mati Mati, Yita Yita, Yorta Yorta, Nari Nari, Watchabalik man. Before I had to speak in English, foreign tongue to this place, I had to sing in my language so that not my ancestors, but our ancestors up there, and ask permission if I'm allowed to speak on country. And no offence, but
my name's Nick Clements. I'm not Aboriginal. I'm a historian with the University of Tasmania, and my research area for most of the last decade has been the frontier conflict in Tasmania and Aboriginal history in Tasmania prior to the mid-1830s. And yeah, I come to this from someone who didn't learn about it at school and was shocked when I went to university and wanted to know more, and here I am, and I find it continuously fascinating.
Hi, I think I just invited myself on. My name's Danielle Flakeler. I'm a Waka Waka Wildman woman. Waka Waka from Gayndah, Mergen, Kingaroy area on my mum's side, and Wildman is Macquarie Marshes, Western New South Wales, where I currently live. I'd like to acknowledge and thank my colleagues but also countrymen for allowing us to speak today and acknowledge their elders who are very present in the land and here with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keep those questions coming up. Write your questions, bring them up, and we'll have a go at answering them. Before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge my community, the Tasmanian Aboriginal community and our community who've come here today from the mainland. I'd like to acknowledge my elders, both past and present, and I'd also like to acknowledge their activism for our community. That it was because of their activism, especially over the period of colonisation, that has allowed me the ability now to have choice and the ability to express myself in many ways that they, my elders, didn't necessarily have. So I'd like to thank my community and the activists within my community. Uncle Rodney, Tracy, Shelley, Kucha, have all been those activists that has allowed me that ability to express myself in the way that I do today. So I'm going to begin with a question, and I actually would like to go to the historian to begin this question. But also, you panellists all have the ability to answer. If I don't target you guys, you can step in at any time and answer or offer what you would like. But the question is, no offence, but how can you call Aboriginal people a civilization if they don't have built legacies such as stone hedges and pyramids?
It's actually not a very interesting question. It all just comes down to the semantics of what you call civilization. They're a society. Strictly speaking, they're not a civilization in the imperial sense. We're all now faced with the problems of civilization, the environmental, population problems. And so I think we could probably learn a lot from a people who were able to live here sustainably on this land for over 40,000 years.
Yeah, look, I think if we talk about civilization, you know, if we have a look at, was the Romans civilized, or was Hitler civilized? Was the people that come here and shot men, women and children, was they civilized? I wonder what civilization looks like in its true sense. And I wonder, when they looked and took our children away, to say that we wasn't civilised, is the word civilised just a common thread for other people to use? To break down
the word.
Not to look at 50,000 years of history or 60,000 years of culture. So I don't give much to the words, what civilised means in my world. I think that being good to one another is more about looking after one another, brothers and sisters, and other people too who are interested in our community and interested in our culture. I think that's more of a way, but I would never hang up too high on what civilised means when you have a look at the wars, when they dropped those big bombs on those people. Was that being civilised to them? I'd say not. Was it, you know, other people in the world? And they're not the only ones, you know, all around the world they've treated people pretty bad, and then a few prayers and a couple of other things and we're all back to being civilised again.
Yes, I think that civilisation is about how people treat each other, and we can add to that and add, you know, where we grow crops in some land, where we plough the earth, put up fences. That's what civilisation was for other people. We also had those boundaries, but they were mountains and rivers, and when we were crossing those mountains and rivers, we got permission to do those things, and that's what we were as, that was the behaviours that we had to demonstrate how we were civilised and treated our other neighbours and brothers and sisters in neighbouring areas.
Who's game enough to align themselves to that question? Exactly.
Thank you. Just for those people who have just walked in and maybe not be familiar with what we're doing, No Offence But Workshop is a workshop where you can ask Aboriginal people and inquire with Aboriginal people a question about Aboriginal culture, people and history. On that note, it reminded me of a No Offence But question that I get a lot, and I'd like to probably target this more at Rodney and Tracy, but again, anybody's able to contribute. But one thing on top of that question I get is, no offence, but why don't you people just get along? Why do you always fight amongst your communities? No offence, but.
Why don't we get along? Because do you get along with your neighbours and people? No, we are not a homogenised group. Just because we're Aboriginal, it doesn't mean to say that we have the same mores, the same type of religion, the same language. We don't have all of those same things, even though we might be neighbours to each other. So where my family come from, they're actually warring nations. So the Waka Waka and the Butchulla people are warring nations. And And so, you know, they're not the same people. So we don't have to agree, but we do need to be able to respect each other. And I think that's how Aboriginal people mainly are. We do actually respect each other. But what's happened over time is that we have been oppressed and things have been taken away from us. Our land, our language, our culture, although not all of it has been taken away from us, but that's what has been the colonisers have tried to do over the many years that they've been here, is to make us go back into, and I can see you're getting ready to answer the question here, you can jump in if you like, but that's what they wanted us to do, was to assimilate, and so that we were all the same as the white people that came here. But what happened was then we became a class below. And it's just like any of the boat people that came here, they all became a class below. And so if they weren't white. And I think we don't get along and we don't have to, just as long as we respect each other.
I was trying to add up how many religions there was in Australia and how many different parties we've got. We've got the Liberal Party and we've got parts of the Liberal Party. We've got the right wing and the moderates, and we've got the Labor Party. They've got the left wing and they've got the right wing, and we've got the Greens, and got all these other parties that's on that sheet. And that sheet's getting bigger every year. And I don't think they all got in, but they want us to get on, and I don't know. You know, it's sort of probably they mightn't have any mirrors in their house.
Have any more in common. Their views might not necessarily align any more than a gay person and a straight person. They just have that one element in common. And so sometimes that word community can be a bit misleading. And of course, as you rightly point out, this goes right back. The original Tasmanians were not one people. They were warring peoples with different cultures, different languages. And so it would be unreasonable, I think, to expect that everyone would be happily singing merry tunes and getting along and agreeing on everything.
So Aboriginal people have been oppressed in this country, and so that means that our land had been taken away from us, and what happened was the wealth had been taken away from us. And what happens when the wealth is taken away from us, we don't have those opportunities. And the opportunities can be around education, they can be around purchasing a house, they can be around living and going wherever you want and eating the food that you like. And so all of our people, when we're oppressed, we are then pushed down into a society, and then we start to try to pull ourselves up out of oppression. And when we start to pull ourselves up out of oppression, we go sideways and we compete with each other. And we compete with each other because we want to then, have that status within ourselves. So Rodney might have a nice new car and I mightn't, and so I'll say, oh, where did you get that car from? You drive around in a big flash brown car.
Than what has transpired in my life. And so I will not do to you what you have done to me. We are an inclusive people. And we are a forgiving people, but we will never forget. what has happened on this whole place now called Australia.
I totally agree. Thanks, Coach, because we are so very loving and warm as a people, and in fact I'd never seen so much love and warmth when I went back home to my families in the Northern Territory. I was loved and accepted just because of who I was, not because of what I did, and not because of what status I had earned in a community. They looked straight at my heart. And then I'd realised why we were so massacred and so slaughtered is because there was such a generosity. You know, I've heard the stories from the old men in the bush when they met that first white man, and they felt sorry for them because they didn't know how to survive. But then that was used against us. So with that helping and that generous nature came such tragedy. But yes, we do carry that today, and of which I know Kutcha and I are incredibly proud of. And we do carry that love and generosity. Yo.
Just to add to that though, a question that I get a lot, you guys might get a lot, is like, but we are all one. We're all one, and why don't we just forget the past or move on, move forward? I hear that all the time, and I think about this with gender equality also. I think about this with marriage equality as well. And what is not understood is that when you have to hide a part of who you are out of fear or the fear of being judged or misrepresented, stereotyped, all those things, then you are not part of the one. You are not part of the broader community. And as Aboriginal people, we still have to hide a part of ourselves to protect ourselves. So that kind of, for me, leads on from that question as well. Is that maybe that is the understanding we need to think about. And it's the same with, not just with Aboriginal people, gender equality and marriage equality and so on. Danielle, I might forward this one on to you if that's all right. No offence, but do you think white people should feel guilty about living here in Australia?
Let me put it back. Do you feel guilty about living here in Australia? You judge yourself. I'm only responsible for myself. And I must say, I met this young Greek girl in Melbourne, beautiful girl. She came up and apologised for being here. She was, I think her parents moved from overseas and then she was first generation in. She said, I'm really sorry for invading your country, Danielle. And I said, thank God you just came here because the food's been much better since she's came. So, if you come and you don't bring to share, you're only here for yourself and your own personal gain, I really think you should feel guilty about that. We've never been a society that posture ourselves as individuals to step over others and to make personal wealth. What we're about in our community is contributing for, each one of us have a role and a responsibility and a gift. That gift should be nurtured to be able to then support our community. It's not about doing it to be a billionaire or whatever your capital gain you want. It's about how can we sustain ourselves, because actually we're part of the natural world. We don't have dominion over it. So if we've got an attitude of I'm coming here for my own greater good, of course I think you should feel guilty about that. But if you're here to help try and revive and renew our natural world, which is suffering in where I'm at the moment, we've got over 2 million hectares burnt. And I think that is from pure greed. And people should feel guilty about that. Why are we still knocking down trees to plant plants that cropped here, like cotton or rice or That's my reality in my little valley. The Macquarie Marshes is dry as a bone because of individual guilt there. Irrigators who make huge profit at the cost of planet, people, prosperity for all, and you know. So yeah, if you've got that attitude, of course you should feel guilty. If not, if you're a team player, well, you can hang around. Make sure you've got some good food though.
The last Tasmanian Aboriginal person?
Again, we're just playing with semantics. She may have been the last Tasmanian Aborigine of full descent. She may not have been. It's not my area, but I've heard that there may have been some women on Kangaroo Island who lived into the 1880s. But there are Tasmanian Aboriginal descendants, and for many of them, their Aboriginal identity trumps their other identities. It's not a particularly interesting question, in my opinion.
What was the question? It's an interesting question, isn't it? To be an Australian, you only have to tick a box. But to be Aboriginal, you've got to jump through all these friggin' hurdles to get to have a native title holder, or to be this or to be that. And, you know, I think when it suited people to abuse us as Aboriginals, it was fine. And then when we got past that mark, then perhaps you're not Aboriginal at all. So it's a bit of an interesting way to really discredit a group of people. And as Aboriginal people, we don't discredit anyone for being Australian. We could say he's only been here 5 minutes, like that 60,000 year thing, but we don't do that. That's not good behaviour to do that. We involve everyone, and we all go along and hold hands. And we don't try and discredit. But what part are you really Australian, or are you really Irish, or are you really English, or Yugoslavian? What are you really? We don't have that. We're Aboriginal people. We've lived here as Aboriginal people, and we've always been Aboriginal people. Was Aboriginal people when we was on the bus going to school? Was Aboriginal people when we was getting kicked out of the school? Was Aboriginal people when we played football? Was Aboriginal people when we got suspended for abusing people that abused us? And then they turn around. So it is a bit of a trick, isn't it? Like, who decides? Who's king of the heap for the day? And it's just a way of discrediting a group of people, saying that our people have lived here and we're proud of our heritage. But to discredit it, say you're not really Aboriginal, is just sort of, and it's not it's not a thing that you'd really bring up in a group like this, because I think the people in this room are genuinely interested in our culture and our heritage. And everyone's got more interested in our heritage and culture just lately when all their back fences was burning down. Oh, geez, we need Indigenous burning. We haven't needed it for 200 years, but we need it today. So it's a very common thing in the house now, isn't it? Indeed, well, geez, we're going to have to burn. We didn't notice it until now. Never heard about Indigenous burning. Now we are interested in it. It's only when it affects you, I think, that you really bring something out that is needed. So I think that, and I wonder, do they think we're Aboriginals when they want us to burn the blocks off, Or are we Irish that day?
Just to add to that question is that I think it's about terminology, and we need to stop saying that Truganini, or refer to Truganini as the last Tasmanian. She was a Tasmanian Aboriginal woman. That's it. Because we are Tasmanian Aboriginal people. We're not descendants. They are our ancestors. We are Aboriginal people. And she's absolutely a strong woman to look up to. And as history tells us, and today, women do play a very vital part and activists for our community.
I just want to sing a songwriter, sing of country, for my descendancy. And we look at the landscape in regards to iconic Australian singers that are in the Hall of Fame, wherever that hall is. Don't know where it is, but I'll find it one day. Olivia Newton-John, born in England. John Farnham, born in England. Jimmy Barnes, born in Scotland. Molly Meldrum, born in Iman, I think the Iman. So all these iconic Australian people within the landscape of music weren't born here. We were born here. And so you must ask yourself, what is that actual question asking? It's interesting. But I'm just trying to think on a different perspective as to, you're asking us who is Aboriginal. Well, who is Australian?
One of the most defining moments of my life was a conversation with my mother, Dewayne Everett, and we met up at Franklin Square in Nipaluna, Hobart. And we met there and was sitting at Franklin Square, and I asked her, I don't really feel Aboriginal, one, because I don't feel cultural, and two, I don't look like you, look nothing like you. And she said that Aboriginality is like a cup of coffee. It starts off black, you add milk, but it's still coffee. I said I like to think of myself as a Belgian hot chocolate, but I was trying to be serious and didn't find that very fun at that time. But it was a great analogy for me to go that it wasn't about what we see, it's about what we feel and what we're connected to. And she also said that as an Aboriginal person, when you step out into the world, you are Aboriginal because those are the responsibilities and the consequences that you carry because of that. And that's part of your journey as an Aboriginal person. To add to this one, to this question, we've only got 10 minutes left of these questions before we have to wrap up, because our panellists have other things to do, because they're famous, like, and all that kind of stuff. No offence, but isn't a national register of Aboriginal people a good idea if it stops non-Indigenous people accessing services intended for Aboriginal Australians? Would you like me to repeat that again? Yeah, because that was a mouth twister for me and I got the note in. There probably is. Would you like me to ask another question?
For whose benefit is that register? Them, the overseers of the money, or us, as the people who will supposedly receive the benefits of now becoming Aboriginal. The irony is that ATSIC itself, the infrastructure of ATSIC and the infrastructure of AAV as it sits now, 30, probably even 20% of the overall monies that come either from state or feds only gets to the people. All the rest is chewed up by hierarchical people who work within those organisations. And that's for whose benefit would that register be? Not for us. It's an interesting question, and and it's all about economics and money.
In some ways, like a register for our people who've been stolen and still currently are stolen children even today, especially in New South Wales, there's a law there where children can still be taken, but under a different act, through the Welfare Act. Those children are taken, they can be adopted, and when they get a new birth certificate, there will be no identity recognised from the day that they're actually adopted. So how are those children going to know who their people are when they're older, because that's my fear, is that we're removing another generation of Aboriginal children, and there's that uncertainty around how they're going to maintain their connection to their community, to their people. But if it's a register just for a government to tick off how many blackfellas in each state and what, how much they're going to put to something, that's not on. It's more around, if that register's there, it should be community controlled and owned and respected. We've had enough having to prove our Aboriginality. If you want to come and get Aboriginal handouts, good luck to you. There's none. Just gonna tell you now. So, there's all that falsehood, all those black armband days type of language where Howard put up that bullshit around blackfellas, get this and that, you pay one payment and you own your car, one payment you own your house. Well, I'd own all of New South Wales if that was the case. Of course, we live in a society where we want equity ourselves, and we expect that, but we're not got it. And so we're actually, people are saying, well, you got equality, but equality doesn't put us on the same level as those who've had the rule making themselves and been making policies and legislation since they got here. Wasn't to make sure there was equity for the First Nations people, it was around stepping on top of us to get the best lands, the best farming, water, all that sort of stuff. So you just go and read what I'm hearing today. This is my synopsis and I'll shut up. Obviously, Australian education hasn't done a good job. If we, our own people, do not have no idea about our history of our First Nations people and what we're still currently going through today, it's pitiful if we're getting questions like this because it's not being taught appropriately in the education system.
I've got a solution. We'll get a redneck policeman, we'll shave his head, we'll call him Peter, and we'll put him into Parliament and we'll let him decide.
You finished there on that point about education, and it's an interesting one. It's really difficult. There's a lot of problems in Aboriginal education. Teachers of my generation and older weren't taught about it at school. We didn't know our history. And so there's that ignorance factor, but there's also fear. We live in a very politically correct age. Teachers are understandably very worried about, they don't want to offend anyone, don't want to say the wrong thing, and often they just put it into the too hard basket. So, I think we need to open up, clear that conversational space out so that people can ask tough questions and not feel... The big thing we can't do is make kids feel guilty. Saying you're white, you should feel guilty is going to get us nowhere. I've seen it time and again, kids just disengage with that message. So I don't know the answer, but I know as it is, the current situation just isn't working, and we've got to fix it.
Are we about to finish? Yeah. Could I pose a question to the audience? And I need 6 people. 6 people to willingly and knowing that what you're going to do, I need you to have a think about the 6 people who are going to do this. Hand over a possession to me that has been given to you, knowing that you may never see it again. Either a wedding ring, a necklace that has been given to you by, let's say, your nana right now. So what is this? Your grandmother's wedding ring. Okay. Yeah. What is it?
My mother's engagement ring.
Yeah. So there's only 2 people. Yeah.
This is my Indigenous husband's deceased now, wedding band that I own.
Yeah. That's 3, 4, yeah. 5, one more. Yeah. So what is it?
It's a necklace over my partner's sister.
Yeah. Remembering you may never see it again. I was born in 65. Born, show of hands in the room who is an Australian citizen. Why did you put your hand up?
I was born in 1954.
You were born here? Okay. Did you put your hand up? No. Who put their hand up over here? Why did you put your hand up?
I was born.
You were born here. Show of hands in the room who was born here but not born an Australian citizen. It's interesting. Laws being created to separate us and acknowledge us as being Australian citizens. So I was born not an Australian citizen, neither was my brother. So what's the difference between me and you? Let's be plain about it. We're Aboriginal, you're not. So how can I ever proclaim to be a proud Australian citizen when I wasn't born one? The 6 gifts that people have handed to me. In 1967, when this magic wand is bestowed upon Aboriginal Australia, the world's supposed to change for the better. Question was posed to white Australia pertaining to Aboriginal people. Should we let them become Australian citizens? Question should have been posed to black fellas, do you want to? But it was posed to white Australia. Interesting concept. In 1967, the world did change for me. I was forcibly wrenched from my mother and father's hands, institutionalised in Melbourne. I too was born in New South Wales, on the Murrumbidgee River. So what you've done is done exactly what my mother and father had to do. Hand over not possessions, but 6 children to authorities, strangers to our people. They're the ones who put us in missions, on missions, and treated us like cattle and dogs. And my mother and father had to hand over 6 children, not possessions, not trinkets of love. We are the poignant, we are the representation of love. Their children, their most prized possessions, 6 of us. And I was 18 months old. Finally, you're getting the gist of what we've been through. And so when we get the opportunity to drop those pebbles in those ponds, brother, it's our responsibility to try and get you to wear the shoes that we wear every single day. Not in an hour session, we live this every single day. And so, no offence, but I'm hungry. And the irony is that the people who handed over those possessions, you'll get them back less than 10 minutes after you handed them to me. My mother and father went to their graves asking themselves, why did it happen to us? Think about that.
Thank you, Kutcha. And just to add to Kutcha, I'm turning 33 this year. I know I don't look it, I'm well fit and all. But I'm the first generation of my family, since European colonisation, born as an Australian citizen. At 32, 33 this year. And just to add to a comment that you made, Brother, too, quickly, you made about the comment about putting it in the too hard basket, because it's too hard. That's a privilege, brother. And we as Aboriginal people don't get to put things in the too hard basket. So we've got to remove that too hard basket. And we've got to find an answer. So just to wrap up this session, we've talked about some pretty heavy stuff, but what I would like our panellists to do is to send off our participants with a bit of word of encouragement and a bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
That you're all sitting here, and that 200 years ago, this sort of thing was just unthinkable. So, whilst there is a long way to go, we have come so far, and that should be cause for celebration. And
It's good for us. And we never sit down. They don't want to sit down in a conversation with us. They want to tell us what's good for us. And at least you're here, sitting in front of us, and willing to ask those questions that sometimes you will never get the answer. But you need to not pose the questions of us, but yourself. If only you had the capacity to say, and to be honest, that's what Kevin Rudd did. He posed the question, what would it be like if that had happened to us? And Paul Keating.
Ourselves. There's heaps of books out there written by Aboriginal people telling their story. There's also books written by non-Aboriginal people who told our story. Blood on the Wattle is one that's written by a non-Aboriginal person that tells the truth. There's a lot out there in Australian publications that we're starting to tell our own stories. So if we're too old to be at school now, there are definitely books out there for us, but also books for our children and our grandchildren who are the future generations. So it'd be great to start passing on to them some of our creation stories, because then they might feel connected and have a sense of kin with our natural world as well. Thanks.
What's encouraging to me is that we have 300 people coming to the Ballawinnie Festival and to the Dark Emu night on Tuesday night, Monday night. And we were booked out well in advance. We were booked out in December. We planned for 500 people, and we probably, if we had the space, we would have filled those numbers. That is really encouraging to see that we've got a community of people who are interested in Aboriginal issues in Tasmania, where they believe that there are no Aboriginal people.
Yeah, so in Australia at the moment, we lock kids up at 10 years of age. We put them in prison at 10 years of age. All the Attorney Generals, and guess who the biggest majority of those kids are in that prison? They're our people. So I've been working, not only me, lots of other people around Australia have been working to try and stop that from happening. We want to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 14, and all the Attorney Generals have agreed to look at how we can get that age up to 14. So I think if we can stop our kids cycling that prison system, the university of crime, that we will go, it will put us ahead a little bit further than what we are today. And I see the light in that to make that change as significant in my life.
Newfound knowledge, or some newfound knowledge with your families when you're sitting with them around your dining table at home. So that's the best thing you can do for us, is to go home and change the conversation. Please give a big round of applause for our panellists. And we'll see you around.